Hey everybody, I'm Alex Cohen.
And I'm Kate Cagle.
And welcome to the latest edition of the Inside the Issues podcast. Kate, it is great to have you back here with us in the ITI pod studio, especially because there is so much great local news, or not so great local news to talk about, including the Fix the 10 disaster and all the political implications of that freeway shutdown.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Viewers will see that I'm 7 months pregnant. Listeners will hear I'm on the comeback from a cold. And when I was getting up to speed on everything I missed while I was out because I was sick, I checked Mayor Karen Bass's timeline to see what she'd been up to. And man, she's been in the swing of things. She is on the phone with the White House. She is riding the train to work. She is in a helicopter with Chief Captain Crowley overseeing the damage. I mean, this is really Mayor Bass in her element.
Yeah.
Being LA's mom, got to fix all the things.
Yes, including the whole situation with this eviction tsunami that she's very worried about. We're going to talk about the latest developments on rent control and the debate that you and I both watched so very closely, the first LA County DA debate featuring the incumbent George Gascón. Spicy, to say the least. So let's start with that I-10 fire situation. This fire broke out underneath the interstate over the weekend. And, I feel like, as you mentioned, Karen Bass was everywhere. I feel like the hurricane downgraded to tropical storm we thought was going to be like the first real test of the mayor in a quote, natural disaster situation. And that one kind of was pretty smooth because the storm avoided us. And then who would have thunk
that was like the practice round?
Yes, exactly. And now came the real thing, as we now definitively know, a man-made disaster in that they suspect arson. And maybe we could just start with that, the cause of the fire, because in the firestorm that is Twitter or X, or whatever you want to call it, I feel like, Kate, there was this immediate assumption: fire, downtown LA, under the freeway. Oh, it's definitely a homeless person who camping fire, right? Because of all these reports, and there have been legit reports of these unintended fires that break out at campsites when people are cooking or trying to stay warm. But I feel like this automatic, oh, it's definitely the homeless.
LA's favorite scapegoat, of
course.
And I think that there are real concerns. I mean, there were 16 people who were living in the area where the fire broke out. There is an arson investigation. But I do want to say the governor's office has said very specifically their investigation is in this fenced off area that was leased to a company called Apex that owed Caltrans money rent, that was subleasing this area of land, it seems, in ways that it was not supposed to be used to store things like hand sanitizer and wood pallets. And this whole conversation that is now erupted around homelessness and the city's response, it doesn't really have anything to do with the actual investigation, because they're not saying that it was an incidental fire. They're saying that it was arson.
Yes, which brings us to a segment we do every week on the Inside the Issues podcast. What's the word? The word is blame. And you called this one, Kate, because it was like the second that this fire happened. And I think in no small part because let's also talk about the impact of it, the traffic nightmare. I live on the northeast side of town, so I don't take the 10, but I take a lot of the freeways that are connected to it. And Monday morning, my commute is like, on a good day, 30 minutes, maybe 40. On Monday morning, it took over an hour and a half.
Oh my
and
goodness.
It was just an absolute freaking nightmare. There's, rain coming up at the end of this week going into the weekend, and it could, who knows what kind of thing they'll bring. And people get really angry about this. So you want to know, okay, whose fault is this? Who do I blame? No surprise at all that people blamed homeless folks. I actually, when I saw earlier this week, pretty quickly, Governor Gavin Newsom and Mayor Bass both saying, hey, hold on now. Let's be really careful about who you're blaming here because, the initial reports are that it is suspected arson. And I posted something about that, like, hey, let's just note, we're looking at arson, which is, well, that doesn't mean that a homeless person didn't cause arson. And why are you calling them unhoused? They're homeless. And just like these really, really intense incendiary reactions. And I think you're right. It all goes to that, like, what is the demographic that everybody loves to blame? And I think it's kind of very, Greek in its nature, right? Like, who do you blame? This is it is so easy to blame homeless people and say, well, they're, addicted to drugs, they're crazy, they're the cause of everything wrong, because that would be really simple, wouldn't it? If we could just say all of Southern California's problems rest with one particular group.
One particular intractable issue that every level of government has been incapable of solving for the past really 10 years since they've been trying. I mean, it is a fascinating discussion, and this was literally litigated in court. The city and the county just settled this massive lawsuit around homelessness and the response. And it just made me think, because the judge in that case, Judge Carter, who's been very hands-on on really trying to understand LA's homelessness crisis, at first, his first directive was to go after people who are living under freeways, saying that it was inherently dangerous
that's right.
for them. But then he actually went to some of these encampments, and the people who are living there explained that if you're at the point in homelessness where you don't have a couch to sleep on, you don't have a car, you don't have anything, a freeway overpass is your shelter from the sun, from the elements, from the rain. So there is a reason that the people who don't have homes end up living under freeways, and this crisis isn't going to be solved until we solve the housing issue.
It's interesting, too, Kate, as I hear you say that, we should also note the U.S. Conference of Mayors met here in Los Angeles this week in downtown. Karen Bass was she's been nominated to be the chair of that coalition. Sorry, that was last week, not this week. It's all a little bit of a blur. But they were talking about, when they talked about homelessness numbers, they talked about not just unsheltered, but they said sheltered in a place that is not appropriate for human beings. And I thought that was a really interesting way of, like, there are people who technically have shelter, but living under a bridge is not a place that humans are supposed to be. It's also not a place that, like, pallets and hand sanitizer is supposed to be stored either. And I think that's another, like, really interesting angle to all of this. First of all, that is land that is owned by Caltrans.
Right.
Because Caltrans, and I am not, I'll admit, not read up on this, but I know for years now, like in Pasadena, where they were planning on building the 710, there were all these abandoned houses that, Caltrans is like the little guy in Monopoly who owns all of these properties. And it's really interesting, like, what they own, what they don't, what they're doing with it. And one of the things that Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass have been saying is, like, Caltrans, take responsibility for your, like, what are you doing if this is your land that this kind of stuff was going on? As you mentioned, though, this company hadn't paid rent in over a year, apparently had been subletting out, and wound up in this situation that all this stuff was stored underneath. And, like, I didn't know that that's what was there necessarily, but I've driven by there. It is really sketchy. And you kind of got to wonder, too, why are we just now saying, hey, maybe Caltrans and law enforcement should be monitoring what's underneath our freeways? Like, the fire might have been new, but we know this stuff is down there.
Realizing freeways had become the under-the-bed storage of county government. Exactly.
Nothing to see here, folks. And I think, too, what's really interesting to see come out of this, there's a whole logo, the Fix the 10. It looks like the interstate icon.
I saw the reporter, Emily Elena Dugdale,
pissed off.
No, she just pointed it out, how quickly that local leaders had really, like, framed this whole issue and, like, literally made marketing messaging around it.
Although I would push back a little bit and say, like, I think what we've learned in this world is that it actually is important to have an icon when people, and first of all, not that hard. Like, I'm sucky at Photoshop, but I could have probably made that. You just take the I-10 sign and you put Fixie on top of it. It's not that, hopefully, didn't cost us taxpayers too much money. But I think getting the word out there is really important. And we've actually seen that. I think another interesting side note to all of this is Mayor Bass came out and said, please don't, if you can work from home, work from home. I just want to make sure my boss has heard that part. I'll take a couple work from home days if you'll have them, and ask people to ride public transportation. And we've actually seen that people have heeded that call. Mayor Bass went and took public transportation the other day to make the point. I guess it's 10% ridership up on Metro when we're seeing rates increase. So maybe that's the silver lining to all of this, is it gets some people to realize, hey, we've got this new regional connector thing. Maybe I don't need to be on the freeway in my car. But a lot of people still are. And a really terrible quote that came out in the LA Times, people saying that you could smell the pollution. Kids who can barely get into their schools now because there's all these massive trucks that have been diverted from the freeway, taking the surface streets. Ugh. It's been a nightmare.
If they can fix it quickly, it will be a win for them.
Yeah, but apparently...
This would be the opposite of Bridgegate, right? Of Governor Christie's infamous downfall.
Yes.
If they can get people back to commuting, get the 10 back open soon. And they keep moving up their own deadlines. So...
Yeah. So, they were worried at first they were going to have to demo the whole, and that would have been an absolute nightmare, probably would have taken months. Now they're saying it's still, not enough damage was done that they have to demo the whole thing. So they were saying 3 to 5 weeks. And then the LA Times had this anonymous source saying it might be open within a week. And then the latest I've seen is that Caltrans is like, do not say that. Because then can you imagine the blame game on that? You said it would be open in a week, and now it's week 2 or week 3 of my, 2-hour commute. Ugh.
Well, and next week anticipated to be the busiest travel week since the pandemic with Thanksgiving.
Right. Oh, man.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Not to be a downer.
We shall see.
You don't want to stay home for Turkey Day.
No. Take public transportation on Turkey Day with your, turkey on your lap of Metro. All right. So... as we wait to see what happens on that, there is some definitive movement on City Council when it comes to rent control. You want to talk about what's happened there, Kate?
Yeah, I pushed this discussion because, full disclosure, I live in a rent control unit, and those of us have been watching this discussion really closely because we haven't had a rent increase as long as the city has been under the emergency COVID ordinance. Those emergency powers are gone it was Councilman Bob Blumenfield essentially saying there's no longer a COVID emergency. We can't keep it at 0. The law says, that landlords have to get a favorable or have to have some sort of a rate of return. So ultimately, if you pay for your own gas and power, you're going to get a 4% increase, which, there had been major pushback from tenants' rights advocates because really around people who are living on the margins, who are dealing with inflation, who've had major setbacks during the pandemic. Seeing your rent bill go up $100 a month, that can be really painful.
Yeah.
And people are really facing these hardships. But I do want to add in something that, I think people forget is if the tenant is evicted, the landlord can raise the rent for the next tenant as much as they want. So there is this balance of trying to keep people in their homes. And that's the main concern of the city council right now is, evictions have already started back up. Councilman Hugo Soto Martinez pointed out there's already been 7,000 evictions in his district alone. So there is major concern that this is going to fuel the homelessness crisis yet again. You want to know a little secret, Kate? You talk about your perspective here as a tenant. I am a landlord. Not probably your typical LA landlord. My mom is my tenant. So, I'm not necessarily gaming to boost her rent a whole bunch. But I have to say, I think when it comes to like who to blame when it comes to our housing situation, it's a really hard one because yes, absolutely, right? Tenants are stretched. Rent today compared to what it was here not that long ago is just extraordinary. What people are, thousands of dollars for one room in a house is nutty. On the other hand, for landlords, and I know this when it comes to doing basic repairs, right? Paying for property taxes. That isn't cheap either. And a lot of us are really struggling. There's all these like different tendrils to this. One of the landlords who spoke at the city council meeting is also a member of SAG-AFTRA and was like, look, I've been on strike for months now. Like I am drowning here. I need some help. Everybody's got a story, it feels like. As you mentioned, they said yes to this 4% increase. Of course, on either side, there were some saying, no, it should be a higher increase. There were others saying there should be no increase. I don't know. I feel like this felt to me a little bit like a compromise in that neither extreme got what they wanted, but it doesn't seem like anybody's like, yay, we found this amazing magical solution either. As someone who's had to move twice from non-rent controlled buildings because our lease was up and the corporate business owner was raising our rent double-digit increases and more than we could afford, because they don't care about having long-term tenants. They just want to have the building filled. And if that means bringing someone else new in, that's what they're going to do. And they think that you'll pay more because you don't want to deal with the inconvenience of a move. At the end of the day, I just feel very thankful for rent control. For those of us who are millennials of this generation, who maybe didn't picture ourselves being lifelong renters, but right now that's how it's looking. It's just nice to really have at least some sort of stability.
Yes, absolutely. I've often wondered, like, is there a peak LA number? Because I think that's really a big part of it. You know, we've heard about people migrating out of Southern California during the pandemic, and there are some numbers to support that, but it seems like there are definitely still too many people here because there's not enough housing. I wonder, and if anybody listening has like seen a study or a report, I feel like, you know, there's probably one of our local universities who said this is the right number in terms of population. This is how many people we could actually house here in LA or here in Southern California. I would love to know what that number is, because I think otherwise we're going to continue in this situation. I'm sure that you're right with some of these rent hikes. Some people won't be able to afford it. They'll probably lose their place to live. Probably some landlords, this won't be enough for them, and they might not be able to keep up with the mortgage and have to sell. We shall see.
We shall
see. But let's move on now to the other big political event that happened this week. I was there on a rainy night in Santa Monica at the MLK Auditorium of the Santa Monica Library. This was actually a newer venue that the Santa Monica Democratic Club picked because their original site was just too small for an LA-DA debate, the first one attended by the incumbent George Gascón. And it would be really interesting. I was there. You watched online. What was your takeaway, Kate, from this event?
Well, you know, I've covered Gascón since the 2020 race. So I've just been waiting to see what kind of Gascón, like shade of Gascón, we're going to get out. And to me, it definitely seemed like fighter Gascón all of a sudden came out, because before, we've seen him during his term, he'll have these, you know, he wants to have a very calm, he keeps his voice very low. This is an intellectual debate about statistics and systemic reform. But that is not the Gascón who came to the stage last night.
No, for audiophiles, there was some serious mic distortion going on. I saw the guy running the soundboard was like, what do I do?
That was me trying to watch it, but it was interesting to see him kind of try out some messaging and how he's going to defend his record after just being absolutely battered by headlines.
Blamed? Yes.
And blamed.
Absolutely. Blamed by
there's our word.
all of the other candidates. And to give folks a taste of that, let's take a listen. This was a pretty straightforward debate. There were a couple little interesting twists, which we'll get to in a moment as well. But you had all the candidates up on the stage. And for the most part, they were asked the same question and given about a minute to respond. I want to add a little bit of color here for you, Kate, because I don't know if you could hear this on the Zoom. What they had as a timer to signal sounded exactly like an alarm clock, bedroom alarm clock. So I kept thinking, I was like, oh my God, it's 5 a.m. every time I heard it. And eventually they switched it to a much calmer tone because no one seemed to be heeding the time calls anyway. But one of the questions was, do you feel that Los Angeles is now more safe or less safe? And of course, right, so many of the candidates there vying to replace George Gascón, who many of them actually, he's their boss, right? They work in the DA's office, came up and just blamed Gascón for all sorts of crimes that they said that were up in all these different categories. But then George Gascón took the mic. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
We're almost seeing that we're at a Republican debate. Let's call it for what it is. Okay, during the pandemic, crime went up nationally, but proportionally actually went up less in our community than many surrounding communities where district attorneys operate the same way that the folks behind me have operated for years. Homicides have started to go down in 2022 and 2023, and they have gone down nationwide, but in our community they have gone down at a higher rate.
And Kate, what folks might have heard there at the beginning is he called it a Republican debate. And this was a debate that was actually hosted by the Democratic Club. But I had a chance to kind of talk to some of George Gascón's team before the event even began. And they were like, this has been the most fun debate prep that we've ever had, because we feel like the right-wing January 6th crowd are going to come after Gascón, and we are so ready for it, and these are not, but they actually, if they weren't Democrats, they couldn't be on that stage. So I don't know that you could call it a Republican debate, although one of the questions was, have you ever been registered as a Republican? And half of the folks on that stage, 4 of them, including George Gascón, raised their hands. It was just fascinating. Hootie, do you feel like there was traction with what George Gascón was saying, kind of saying, oh, this is fake news when you say crime is up. Crime is actually down in a lot of ways. How do you think that resonates with the voting public?
We used to have this segment on Spectrum News 1 called That's So LA.
Yes.
And that's this whole discussion, right? And it reminds me so much of last year's sheriff race. It's very similar themes. You have, you had the embattled sheriff who was clearly weak. You had a very crowded field in the primary with people trying different tactics. You had the Sheriff Villanueva himself, who was really trying to position himself as a moderate Democrat. But in doing that, got himself a lot of airtime on places like Fox News and started to lean into more of those more conservative sounding talking points, which is something that we've seen a lot of the challengers who are trying to take on Gascón do, because it does get you airtime on Fox News. I don't know how many Los Angeles County voters, though, are actually getting the message and how appealing it is to them, because when it comes down to time for LA voters to finally go to the ballot and cast their votes, election after election, despite all this law and order rhetoric, voters are still voting incredibly progressive. I would point to the win of Karen Bass over Rick Caruso. I would also point to Lindsay Horvath's win for LA County Supervisor. We're not really seeing that messaging actually resonate with voters. Although, when you talk to those people who are in the weeds with LA politics, they will tell you that Gascón is very weak, that voters don't view him favorably. But now we're seeing a new Gascón come out, and that he has been under such attack over the past 3 years for fulfilling his own campaign promises.
Yeah, I said what I was going to do, and I have done it.
And he has done it. And it was interesting watching the debate last night, because you really only heard 2 candidates, Gascón and Jeff Chemerinsky, mention mass incarceration, which was, that was a huge part of the campaign that swept him into office in the first place.
Yeah, and the death penalty, which I thought was another interesting moment where George Gascón, and I feel like there are these 2 worlds. There's the world of social media, and especially Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it this way, where sometimes I don't know, I feel like if I spend more than 5 minutes there, it feels like the angry mobs in Frankenstein who are like out with their pitchforks and torches blaming Gascón and all these progressives for everything that is wrong with LA, especially in terms of crime and safety. But then you remember that that is just one portion of our community. And it was really interesting to be IRL in a room with people, and people were so boisterous. At the beginning, the organizer of the debate said, we know you all have feelings and opinions, but we're not here to hear from you guys tonight. Like, let's hear from the candidates. So please, no booing, no applause. Nobody listened to that. There were lots of moments of boos. There were lots of moments of applause. And they were, I would say, like, pretty even, right? As many people as there were booing Gascón for saying, here's what my approach is and here's why. There were a lot of people really applauding it as well. So when he talked about things like the death penalty and why he doesn't support it, he talked about, he mentioned one case where there was a man who was sentenced to the death penalty, and years later, he was exonerated. It turns out that he was wrongly convicted. And George Gascón talked about, I can't live with that, putting an innocent man to death. But how often do you hear about that case, And I think in the end, you can look at all of the crime numbers that you want, and there are actually some really good ones out there from LAPD, the folks across town LA. They break it down by neighborhoods and will tell you exactly what's going on with bicycle thefts and catalytic converter thefts in your community. But Kate, I don't think any of it matters if you yourself have been a victim of any kind of crime, or if you haven't, you know what I mean? If you feel safe walking around your neighborhood at night, then you feel safe. And if you do not feel safe for any reason, regardless of where you live or what the crime stats are there, then you don't feel safe. It's that notion of perception being so much stronger than reality. But in the end, who's showing up to vote? And will all those people running against George Gascón dilute the vote in the primary and was, guaranteeing him? I think he's probably got a spot in the general election. I don't know if he wins it outright in March, but
I think he's got enough of the backing of the LA establishment to keep him going, at least through the primary. And I have to say, I mean, John Hatami, John McKinney, Eric Siddall, these are the deputy DAs who are part of this pack. They have been very adept at weaponizing these cases and helping these crime victims aren't just coming forward on their own. These have been at the urging of these prosecutors to come out, to tell your story, tell about the fact that they didn't go for basically as full-throated justice as how you wanted to see. And some of those stories have been extremely compelling. I don't think a single one so far has been compelling enough to be the story of the election, the way that 2020 was the George Floyd election.
Oh, that's such a good point, Kate. One of the candidates, I believe it was Judge Archuleta, who brought up the deputy, Klinkenblum, forgive me if I'm getting his name wrong, but the deputy who was shot in his car. And in that moment, that was such a powerful story. And I think all the candidates vying against George Gascón were talking about it so strongly. But by the time we get to March of 2024, and I hate to say this because I want his memory to be preserved and I want people to recognize the awful nature of that incident. And yet there's so much going on that I think people move forward from that really quickly. And like you said, there's not that moment of everyone sitting at home during the pandemic, the death of George Floyd that really galvanizes people. One more thing I thought was interesting, too, that you might not have noticed if you were watching the debate online, is that two of the candidates weren't on stage, retired Judge David Milton and former U.S. Attorney General Nathan Hochman, who is registered as no party preference. And I spoke with registered as a Republican previously, as were four of the candidates on that stage.
Ran as a Republican last. I had to, but for the record, I went back and looked at my photo because I had this clear photo of Nathan Hochman and standing in front of his bus, running as a Republican for Attorney General. And I looked it back, and it's from October of last year. Yeah. But then being upset that he wasn't included in this Democratic debate, which maybe he should have talked to Rick Caruso before he jumped in the race to get some advice on how to run if you want to win in LA.
Yeah, it's really interesting, especially with the way that primary elections work in this state. But it was really interesting what he did very last minute was said, I am also going to be at the Santa Monica debate and I'm going to give my own press conference where he talked about, he feels like this position of district attorney should be one that's nonpartisan. He said, when a robber comes to your house and steals things, you don't ask them to, what is your party preference, which I guess is true. And it was interesting kind of throughout the debate, he was going on social media, doing his own, having kind of his own debate there. And, maybe some folks found that. Who knows? Maybe they didn't. Very interesting to see. The Santa Monica Democratic Club will be announcing their endorsement for that race at the end of January. So they'll have some time to mull it over.
All right.
Yes.
I think we'll be watching. Endorsements are going to be big. It'll be really interesting. I saw Maria Shriver shared a tweet from John Hatami yesterday saying, this is the guy with the answers. Ooh. So, yeah, fascinating.
And one more item we'd like to update you about, we've talked about here on this podcast, is the recall election in Santa Ana. This is in Ward 3, a seat held by Jessie Lopez. Some folks there, again, blaming her on the crime and safety issues that are going on in the city. So organizers got a recall effort on the ballot. They asked voters in the newly redrawn Ward 3 to weigh in on it. They got enough signatures, but then there were some concerns raised by the Orange County Registrar, Bob Page, saying, wait a minute, this is not the same people who elected her. If you're having a recall election, kind of feel like you should be asking those people. He brought that to the attention of the city council. They heard a lot of testimony on it. They were kind of like, ooh, we don't know what to do. So they deadlocked and did nothing. Say, hey, maybe a judge can weigh in. fine. A judge said, let's have the election continue. So that it did. It wrapped up November 14th. And in the end, after all of that debate and discussion, 56% of the electorate in Santa Ana said no to the recall election after all of that. So Jessie Lopez stays in the spot for the time being. Fascinating stuff at play there. And last but not least, 'tis almost the season for the holidays. If you're looking for a little special something for the law and order enthusiast on your list, the LAPD has something. Kate, I got the official release. I forwarded it to you.
A lot of people forwarded this release to me thinking,
Kate's going to love this.
Kate's going to love this. Well, you know what? Haters will say it's propaganda, but those of us with fathers of a certain age that have a very difficult time around Christmas, I was like, would he want some
Dad might
LAPD
like
swag?
this.
Maybe. Shirts are only $22. That's not that bad. But I looked at the website. It wasn't clear to me on the website where the money is actually going.
Ooh, that's a good question. Maybe the Police Protective League, the union, who knows? But the items too, Kate, like there's some really interesting ones. There's hoodie, there's like your typical swag that you have. And then there's a cross, which I like. I don't know if that's separation of church and state, like a cross pendant.
The cross protect and serve pendant is sold out, ladies. So just so you know, apparently that one was very popular stocking stuffer for LAPD families. I sent to you the rideable dune buggy for your toddler.
Yeah, how much was that?
To cruise the city streets. Yeah, $300.
Yeah. Pretty amazing, right? That it's just all sorts of fascinating stuff. What it reminded me of is the LA Coroner. For years, they've had a shop that actually, I remember my husband
I want you to see that I wrote on my paper right here, Skeleton's Closet.
Skeleton's Closet.
That's what it was called.
Oh my God, you're right.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. Yeah, and you used to be able to go. My husband, the first time he ever visited LA, he was like, oh my God, I got this really cool T-shirt from the coroner's shop. So
you could get a beach towel with a body outline on it. Yeah, it was a little morbid. It closed in 2019. I don't know why.
Yeah. Hey, and who knows where that money went. So if you've got any ideas where the LAPD merch, where those profits are going to, let us know. We'll put a link to the shop in our show notes if you want to take a peek and do some holiday shopping of your own. That is it for this edition of the Inside the Issues podcast. Let us know what you think. Kate is there on social media at
Kate Cagle, KateCagle.
And I am there at Alex Cohen in LA, and we will see you here next week. The Inside the Issues podcast is a Spectrum News One production. Crystal Goss is our producer. Nathaniel Leathers is our editor. The executive in charge of production is Jeff Shore.